Without any further ado, I'd like to introduce John Anderson. John is a retired UPS chief pilot, uh, presently instructing in the sim for, uh, sorry,
King Air.
uh, King Air, to King Air pilots. And so go ahead, John, take it away. We're still letting
Okay.
people in here.
All right. Thanks so much, Paul. First, again, thank you, Paul, for letting me come in
Yeah.
and chat with everybody tonight. And Mike and James, thanks again for the opportunity to be a part of this neat team. The FAST team is really dynamic, and I just love being a part of it. So, this topic, I think, is near and dear to everybody's heart on this forum. I know for me it is. Loss of control in flight is it particularly, but first a little bit more about me. I am a retired airline guy. You'll know because if I start into bad jokes like, you know, how was copper wire invented? Two captains fighting over a penny. I mean, you'll understand those as we move along. So I'm retired UPS chief. I did international stuff. I was a check airman on the 7-2. That's how far back it goes. The 7-5, 7-6 flew DC-8, and was basically in training most of my career with UPS. I was in their training center and then trained in the airplanes and so on. So it was a good deal being part of that night team. Um, I got out of my background also was not military. I was a civilian pilot, so I did it the hard way to get there. It took forever back in the 80s because there was no opportunity, it seemed. But finally, an opportunity happened in 88 with deregulation. Everybody, that's when Southwest was born and all these other carriers, FedEx, UPS, all were created with deregulation, which took airline control away from the Civil Aeronautics Board. So that created opportunity. Since then, it's hard to retire in this business. I left a little bit early for some reasons, family reasons, from the airline, and no sooner than I'm out in the airline than I get calls from the FAA saying, "Hey, are you available? I know San Diego Christian needs a new chief, and this and this." So it started from there. Ended up running the San Diego Christian 141 program for a while, then got back into King Airs through training Chinese pilots at Gillespie Field. So we'd put them in a C-90. I'd train them in ground school, and then we put them in a C-90 and fly around and give them 25 hours experience. Then they'd head off to the Boeing Training Center in Shanghai and go jump into the right seat of a 7.5 or a 7.3 with about 25 hours of King Air time and 250 or 300 total time. Also did some, presently I have a school, a simulator, a Redbird sim. And basically what I do is in my schoolhouse, I do King Air recurrence, Part 91 recurrence, mostly for insurance purposes. Most King Airs don't require a special rating. The multi-engine rating is all you need for most of them. When you get to the big King Air, the 350, that's a type rating. That's a special training. So anyway, I have obviously, and then I also go out and fly King Airs too. So I get a call and someone needs help in Utah, I'll go over and fly their King Air, their passengers, and all that stuff. So I do fly still. So there you go. So this topic, loss of control, it's just hard to imagine that we have such a problem with it. What I've got here, this is an earlier presentation from 2014. It was put together, obviously, by the FAA as part of a loss of control working group. So the material in it was a bit dated. So it's pretty much there intact, except I've updated it with additional charts from the National Traffic Safety, so we can get a comparison. And I think you're going to find it very interesting to look at. The problem's still the same as far as being the number one cause of fatal accidents, but with the newer data that I'm going to put up, you'll get a different perspective of it that I think, I know I found it very, very interesting. Let's start with something like this, which is kind of why I'm here. This is Addison, Texas. Is a King Air 350. It's the first and only crash of a King Air 350, a type-rated airplane. It had a licensed pilot in the left.
9:11 and 4 seconds a.m. 911, what's the address of the emergency?
Addison Control Tower, we have an alert 3, King Air has just crashed into the Scott
Okay.
building.
That is a loss of control in flight. I can tell you that when you go to the NTSB report, the NTSB report basically says captain's inability to follow manufacturer's recommendations with a loss of power. In this case, it is likely he had a throttle rollback. The way the power levers work in a King Air, the PT6s use a kind of a funky spring system with a lot of angles and springs. And we actually have friction locks that we have to tighten. The checklist calls for tightening those about 2 or 3 times throughout the course of the preparation for flight. And then obviously, if you do have a throttle or migration back, when you're going for the gear handle, the goal would be to immediately get that up there, of course. And then after that, you've got to fly the airplane, apply appropriate rudder, fly the airplane per the checklist. So they say failure to follow that. The truth is, if you go to the checklist for the King Airs, and most of the King Air crashes, which is again why this is so important to me, most of the King Air crashes involve ultimately loss of control in flight. They're basically VMC loss of controls. If you go again to the reports say, well, failure to follow the manufacturer's recommendations for loss of power. You've got to actually go to the checklist right after that that says, if you get slower in VMC, you lower the nose and you fly as far into it as you can. That did not happen. So this particular and many of these incidents usually involve a highly experienced captain. This guy had 20,000 hours with an inexperienced co-pilot. In this case, it was a young flight instructor and in the right seat. I don't know the level of his training. Allegedly had been trained, but obviously a lot of things broke down here in terms of checklist discipline. There was a lot involved here. But having said that, in the end, it was a LOCI VMC loss of control. It was just tragic. Let's see if we can move on here. Oh, there we go. I have a question for everybody. Do you have this one, Paul? And
Yes. Number 5, here we go, launching it now. Okay, should be launched. Slide 5, loss of control pole.
right,
You'd like
so of
Go ahead.
LOC accidents, especially fatal ones that happen obviously during takeoff, initial climb and approach and landing, of the above, what phase of that particular flight is often cited as the riskiest for LOCI? I'll let Eula read the results. I don't see them here. Oh, wait, no, it's over here. Very good.
Yeah, so we're at about 82% participation. We'll give it a few more seconds. And we got 23 out of 28. Can we get any more? We got 30 participants. I got one more in here. Okay, I'm going to end the poll at 23 out of 29 and share the results.
Okay,
And
and let's see what this says here. Most loss of control actions, especially fatal ones, happen during takeoff, initial climb, with takeoff climb being cited as the riskiest. So pretty much I see takeoff, that's it, initial climb. So pretty much everybody's kind of in line with that. And that's, of course, what's happened with that particular King Air incident and most of them that have occurred. So this is from the original Joint Steering Committee. This is data about LOCI. It's pretty neat information when you have a lot of time to look at it, if you look at it down the road. But basically, most loss of control accidents, obviously we have about 12. Now remember that this is fatal accidents. This is not all accidents. This is just fatal. But the preponderance obviously are non-home built. The home built are a percentage, and it's interesting, but turbine are in there too, because that's general aviation, so they're included into that. When you look at that compared with CFIT, I mean, it's 3 times what we get with CFIT. And that's from 2001 to 2010. So that data, a little bit old, I have newer data, it hasn't changed much. It's still basically the same percentages. LOCI is 3 times the CFIT accidents. It's greater than really CFIT. I mean, all of the rest combined. General Aviation Action 20, this is still from the same genre. Drilling down by phase of flight, LOCI by phase of flight, maneuvering. That's still a preponderance of incidents. Again, and it affects everybody, including the turbine, which is the sort of magenta color in there, and the home builds, yeah, they're in there too. You can see percentage-wise from maneuvering, approach, the en route, and the initial climb, really what we're dealing with in terms of percentages and numbers. So to get some current data, I went to the NTSB, this particular link, to get some newer data. This is a busy slide, but I wanted to show you the initial presentation. Oh, I get a question first. How about this?
Okay. And this is slide 12, right?
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. It's launched. So if people would answer the poll question here on your screen. Very good. We're getting a third of you have got it. Got 50%, almost 60% participation. Okay. So we got 24 out of 30. Any more? Okay, it looks like we're at 24 out of 30, 80%. So I'm going to end the poll to share the results.
Okay. Show them that now. We're gonna give you that answer to that poll question on the next slide. So this is the NTSB website, and you go in, and I know it's tough to see. I'll put my cursor up here, but you can see that you can at the top of the page you can civil, the summary, the details. You can select airlines, Part 121 carriers. You can select Part 135 and on demand. And mine, and this one, of course, is general aviation. When you do that, you can also come over here to the left side. You can pick up the particular calendar years you're looking for. So you can do it over 10 or whatever. Also, if you come down the left side, I know it's hard to see, especially if you're on your phone. There's aircraft category, engine type, number of engines, and state, and so on. It's really neat. And then whatever filters you've put in on the left side is depicted down here on this map. And so you can see that primarily I've got North America here, and all of these little dots down here are an incident of some kind. And then it's summarized here. So this one is the one we're talking about. I'm going to go to the next slide, try to give you some more detail. Oh, let's see here. There we go. So here is loss. Here is the 2011 to 2020 all GA aircraft accidents by defining event from the NTSB. Loss of control is still number one. It's also almost 50% fatal. The number two is loss of control on ground, which is kind of a head scratcher for me. But I guess they separate whether or not this is a landing or takeoff incident. The next one is system or component failure, power plant or whatever have you. Then there's abnormal runway contact. Then you come down to fuel related. Then there's system component control, flight into terrain, and so on. So you can see loss of control in flight. I mean, that's the highest fatality period there is. But from a percentage standpoint, if you scroll down on this, or not scroll down, but just look down, controlled flight and terrain by percentage of incidents is the highest fatality rate in terms of percentages, but obviously not in numbers. So LOC, that's a big problem, along with LOC ground. Thank goodness it's not, it doesn't tend to be fatal. All right. This is where you can really have some fun with this NTSB site from the standpoint of folks, for classrooms, for your students, or from whoever, when you want to really drill down and have them thinking about this. I asked for GA, single engine GA aircraft only in this slide. So you can see that loss of control on ground becomes, when you just do single engine loss of control, yeah, you're talking loss of control on ground is number one. I mean, loss of control in flight drops to third place.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Really interesting to me that that means that when we put the twin engine back in, guess what? it's trouble. So
Mhm.
loss of control on ground by single engine is the number one. Since system component power plant, then loss of control in flight is number three in total incidents, but obviously the most dangerous because again, it's about 40% results in 40% fatal accidents. And then there are other related topics down below. So you got a feel for that. Well, let's look at the next one. Let's look at the same time period, multi-engine GA aircraft only. This is going to include the Duchesses, the King Airs. That's all going to be in here. In this case, loss of control in flight is the number one. So when it comes to single engine airplanes, LOCI in flight is not number one in incidents. But when it comes to multi-engine, it certainly is. It's a big deal. And when you look at loss of control out of a multi-engine aircraft, it's nearly always fatal. I mean, it's 80% of this is a fatal incident. So there is a little bit of runway contact issues. I can't tell you how they really define that. I didn't have time to get into that detail. I don't think it was important here because this is about LOCI. And then power plant failure comes in and some other things lead to that. Controlled flight and terrain down on this one is while you will get about a 50% or so fatality rate on that in single, I suppose there's some, it's just because of velocity, but in the case of the multis, it's the highest percentage of fatal incidences is controlled flight and terrain with a multi-engine airplane.
John, we got a couple of questions. Maybe now would be a good
Oh
time.
yeah, can you handle that? Can you put those guys on here?
I can read them to you. They're in the chat, but the
Yeah. Oh, here we
most
go.
recent one is, are the inadvertent IMC embedded in the loss of control and flight numbers?
That is a great question. I suspect it might be. I don't know. LOC. Yeah, that would be, yeah, you would VFR flight into IMC. I would think that would be, that's a great question. I don't know. VFR flight into IMC. I'll have to try to find that one in the NTSB report. I don't have you an answer right now. Not an accurate one.
Okay, we have another question right above that. Regarding the takeoff and climb, it mentions about high angle of attack and distractions as the reasons, but what distractions are we talking about here? Can you provide some examples to relate to?
That's a great question. Yes, I can tell you right now, for example, with most of the King Air accidents, for example, which again, let's forget the 350 because that's a balanced field length type rated airplane. It's flown like a jet. When you look at the 200s and the 90s, which are Part 23, just like a Duchess, the typical distraction is some problem right at rotation. In the case of a throttle migration or some other things that occur at rotation that have people going, what in the world? And the next thing you know, they've only got seconds before they have a problem. In the case of that King Air accident I showed you, I think the final words in the transcript are the most telling, some of the most telling I've ever heard in aviation. And the last thing the captain said on that transcript on that crash you saw was, "What in the world?" He had no clue what was going on. Nothing. It was horrible. I mean, this is a 20,000-hour pilot, completely, and it probably was a throttle migration. Could have been something else. And the other ones, and there was one 4 years ago that killed Ron McAllister, who was the founder of the King Air Academy, one of the largest Part 91 King Air training facilities in the West, and that was in Scottsdale. And it was the same thing. He took an airplane out of maintenance and had it out of trim. Got airborne with aileron one way, rudder another, came out of maintenance apparently without a good, and he had a VMC loss of control. From a lighter airplane standpoint, I would ask we wait a little bit and we jump into that because the group that put this together, they actually go into that, and I'm going to ask for some audience participation.
Great. Okay.
But great questions. Feel free. I'm having trouble seeing them because my screen's full of stuff.
Yeah.
Let's see. I see some of them here. Okay, there, I got that. Paul, if you wouldn't mind, just relay those, would you?
Sure, I will continue to.
Anyway, so that's multi-engine, so we obviously have an issue there. We got another question.
Okay, slide 16, I think. Okay, I launched
So we're
the
talking
question.
flight training now. So we're not talking GA, we're not talking any of that, us going out. We're just talking flight training. What is the number one risk during flight training?
Hey, we got a quarter of the folks have answered,
Okay.
a little more than half now, 2/3. And looks like we we got 23, 74%. I'm going to end the poll and 25 now, 80%. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results. There we go.
Based on now, this data is NTSB through AOPA. I found they did some nice tabulations, so I used AOPA as a reference here. But it is LOC is still the number one risk during flight training, accounting for 155 fatal accidents. Of these, 89 occurred in the 2000s and 66 in 2010s. Primarily stall spin accidents or VMC rolls. Yeah, we do. I hear about them every so often around the country. We'll get a light twin accident and it'll be a VMC, rollover. In this case, they also talk about spatial disorientation and interestingly, structural limitation exceedance. I don't know how that happens, but uh, so
Severe
jumping
turbulence.
further, let's see. Okay. What airports? What's this? I never heard of those airports. Two of us are in.
Oh, BC says the biggest risk is running out of money. And the second largest is needing to use the restroom during the flight.
As a King Air guy, I'm have to agree with that. That's getting into that thing is crazy tight, and then you don't even want to get up during a flight. That's funny. Whoever put that, I sympathize.
I hope somebody didn't have a mechanical failure earlier in their training that's got them worried about that being the number one issue. But yeah, I'll stop
Okay.
sharing that.
AOP Air Safety, they had some neat stuff here. LOCI categories, fatal flight training report 2000 to 2019. This is 20-year, obviously. Stall spin is really number one. It's a VMC roll. Obviously, there were 12 incidents, and other was 21 for a total of 155. When we get to talking a little bit about prevention, I'm gonna ask a couple things here, people, because I just know that in my day, I don't want to sound like somebody's dad, but in my day, I'd take a 150 up and I'd spin that thing down from 6,000 feet to 2,000, go up again and spin it down, go up again. I'd take people for a ride. I go, you want to go first? Down. I never understood it being a big issue, and I was never even close in the pattern. Never. I don't get it, but it's an issue. Another question.
Okay, this would be slide 19. Yep. Okay. Okay. It's launched there.
So we're going to drill into a little more detail. So of those 155 LOCI fatal accidents, what topics were 25 or more accidents? Emergency, maneuvering, takeoff, go, or all the above?
Mhm. Okay, we got 2/3 completion or participation, 76% now.
Okay.
Okay, 80%. Okay, I'm going to end the poll, share the results,
Okay. Thank you.
and there you go.
All right. Let's get here. Let's see if we can. There's the chart from AOPA for 20-year period. Basically, all of the above. They're all a problem with takeoff and climb being the preponderance at 48, but look at maneuvering, 45, emergency procedures, 26.
Oh, yeah.
Man, that's, we still have stall spin issues. So it looks to me, it's interesting. Intentional stall spin is only 12, and then downwind base. I'm going to be curious what some of you say about that
Mhm.
here in just a bit. Okay.
Okay. Stop sharing it.
Okay. Okay. This is the loss of control working group. This is what they came up with in 14. The concerns that, because their job is to mitigate this, that's what we're trying to do here. And I'm going to tell you what I do with multi-engine training, and I'm going to want to hear what everybody here is doing if they have any neat techniques. But we're going to first just talk about transition training. The working group felt that we needed more and thorough transition training and tight clubs. Stabilized approaches and landings need strengthening. Risk-based flight reviews. I take that to mean defined performance and getting through them, maybe a little more scrutiny. Single pilot CRM, that's an interesting one. We'll hit on it, and I'm curious what everybody says. Aeronautical decision making is obviously a big, big deal. And angle of attack systems is interesting. So when we get to that, I have something I've added in on that because I can tell you that Beechcraft, for example, is very keen on the fact that a lot of their airplanes wind up in VMC loss of control in flight. And they will never tell you what they're doing. They just make subtle changes. There's just too much liability, whatever. So they make subtle changes that are directed at trying to mitigate that. And we'll cover that. So here we go. So I'd like to introduce somebody here. Andy Littlefield is on this call. I asked Andy to join us. Andy is the president of Prevectus, a flight training organization or school in Gillespie that's been there quite a while. They used to specialize in just flight instructors. I think they're doing everything primary and so on. Andy is a jet varmint flying a Gulfstream and running this school. I've flown with Andy and really good. In fact, I think Andy, you were the guy that helped me. Well, quite a few years ago, back when you were the chief of CFA, when I foolishly let my flight instructor rating lapse and had to get a check ride. Don't ever do that. That is the hardest thing. That is the hardest rating in the world. Anyway, Andy got me tuned up for that. Andy, is there a way, can you jump in here? And before we go through all these points, can you just give me the group, your thoughts from a standpoint of a philosophy of Prevectus with your instructors in terms of what's in your head in terms of going out? Is LOCI like a number one concern, and is it in every phase of training? What do you think?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Doc, and thanks for putting this together. This is awesome, and I think definitely a heavy hitting topic that requires some good attention. So thank you. Yeah, in terms of loss of control in flight, absolutely. I think in the training environment, it definitely is at the heart of what we do and should be. I think a couple points I have here is I ultimately think it unfortunately sometimes is lost in translation a little bit. I get it, maneuver after maneuver, power off stall after power on stall. I think the complacency sets in and we start doing maneuvers just to do maneuvers, and we kind of start losing the point of, hey, why the heck are we actually doing this maneuver? And we're at a safe altitude, which is awesome, and we should be, obviously. But I think some remedies to that we'll utilize is get in the simulator. Go do these stalls at low altitudes when you're actually coming into land or right after departure and see what it feels like. And we're really, really big on it as opposed to not necessarily just a power off or power on stall, but approach to landing stall or departure stall, because that's when you're most likely to get it when the workload is high and you're distracted. The numbers you guys showed, there's not very many in cruise flight, right? For obvious reasons, the workload's a lot less. We probably don't have a sterile cockpit at that point, anyways. Not being complacent is big. Configuration changes and variations are huge for us at the primary level. All too often, we see people get in the groove of just doing the maneuvers in the exact same configuration every time. When you throw a wrench in their spokes and hey, use flaps full for your departure stall. People tend to forget how to recover, and it's really not that big of a deal. We recover the same way every single time, regardless of the configuration. And again, that mindset, of doing things the same way each time helps a lot, with not getting yourself into a loci situation. Couple other things we emphasize per your guys' slides, which are awesome. When we look at the landing phase of flight coming in, airspeed management is huge. Especially in training, I don't know why we try to salvage landings. I was talking with James with the FAA about this actually in the office maybe a month ago. Go around. We don't salvage a landing, right? The small airplanes are forgiving, I get it, but you start flying something bigger, not so much. And the way we remedy that is just like in a two crew environment, right? The pilot monitoring ought to be calling out airspeeds. Well, if you're flying alone or a single pilot operation, call out those airspeeds yourself. That shows that you're cognizant of your airspeed. And if you don't like it, fix it. And if you can't fix it, go around and set up and do it again. It's really as simple as that. And then lastly, I would say, and if we get into VMC later, I've got a couple thoughts on that, but maybe I'll leave it here with this last bit is, especially as aircraft start to get newer and we bake in technology, AOA indicators, stall horns, don't ignore them, right? It's a pet peeve of mine a little bit when we're in the airplane, the stall horn goes off and the pilot doesn't say anything, right? That's supposed to get our attention. That's alerting us to a potential loss of control that's impending. So if you hear that, call it out. And if it's just a nuisance, chalk it up to a nuisance, that's fine. But we have these bells and whistles and technology to help alert us. So lean on them and call it out and use them to your advantage. So, to sum it up, yeah, loss of control in flight, serious, and it's definitely at the heart of what we do. And I would say it's really the purpose of doing these maneuvers under the guise of avoiding loci.
Okay, thanks. Anybody else got anything here?
Well, we had a question about what are the type clubs, and so I tried to answer that in the chat.
Okay.
So I think we got that covered.
Okay. So I'd like to throw a couple cents in here. So what I get at my school is well, I get the experienced guy, I get the 20,000 hour King Air guy and all that stuff. That's true. But I also get the CFI that's transitioning to his first job, which is pulling gear on one of these King Airs for experience. For insurance purposes, the insurance companies like two people in there. And I will tell you that from a simulator standpoint and an aircraft standpoint, I think because this applies to transition training, I think we have to come up with a way to better facilitate a paradigm shift. In other words, if I take a young pilot that's got 500-600 hours of single engine instructor time, I'm talking a good pilot, I'm talking an instructor, he's proven, and maybe he's got 25 hours of multi-time. When I get him in my sim or I get him in the airplane, I tend to see that they still kind of fly like it's a single engine airplane. In other words, they prioritize, for example, when we're a single engine airplane, we tend to prioritize altitude. We take off, we're going to fly at an optimum speed so that we can get high enough to do the impossible turn if we so choose to, if we have a problem. When you get into a multi-engine airplane, it's the opposite. We don't care how high as long as we're not into a departure terrain issue. We're into speed because all the altitude in the world, if you're down at VMC, is not going to help you. You're going to do a VMC rollover. And I think there's another thing that I try to instill in people is that, when we train people in a Duchess, which I've done, we take them up, we go up to 6,000 feet and we make sure the density altitude isn't so bad that we've got on the backside of the curve and we're stalling before we lose directional control and so on. Having said that, I think when we do that, we numb people to how close VMC really is. I will tell you from a training standpoint, what I tell my students is I kind of think back to that Jurassic Park movie where Goldblum's in the Jeep and the mirror says, and this has got a dinosaur, and the mirror says, objects in mirror are closer than they appear. I'm going to tell you now, every takeoff is a potential VMC demo. Every one. when you're rotating an airplane like a King Air at 95 knots and it VMCs at 88, you're 7 knots from VMC. Every takeoff on these airplanes, Duchess, you get in any of them, these takeoffs are darn close to VMC. So you get a distraction, and those distractions can be interesting. They could be something like you go to pull the gear up and the ground interlock isn't working, whatever reason, the ground squat switch isn't working, then you're tugging on the gear handle and it ain't coming up. And so you're going, shoot. You're rotating, you're pitching, and you're reaching down and you're trying to find that release lever to release it. You can bring the gear up. Suddenly you watch that speed and it's coming way back. So when I get a young pilot, I see that if they have a ton of single engine time, they're prioritizing altitude. And once they get enough multi-time, they start to prioritize speed, because, for example, again, on many of these airplanes, the Beechcraft products, the takeoff maneuver is completed at 50 feet. That's the takeoff per the chart. So you take off, you rotate at 95. That's rotation. Some airplanes like that one, they'll put a V2 in, a climb speed, takeoff safety speed. Well, that takeoff safety speed probably is 115 knots. Well, we need to get to that, and that's not even blue line, but we need to get to that by that 50 feet. What I see a lot of times is people taking the thing off at 95 or at 100 or whatever it is, and they're slow to get that speed. I need, they don't understand. We're not an F-15. That thing has got to, we got to get airborne, get that speed, get that takeoff safety speed, V2 or better, if terrain allows, to V2 or better, get as quick as we can. We should be done with that by 50 feet. And many of these you got to go by your chart. I can tell you, Beechcraft, 50-foot ends a takeoff maneuver, and you need to be at your ready for your V2 speed from 50 to 400 feet. So I see transition training affecting. I see this, and I have to untrain that. That's all. It's a paradigm shift. So anyway, I'll move on to the next slide here. I want to use all the oxygen in the room here. Let's see. The working group, the LOC working group said, hey, we need to emphasize stabilized approaches under scenarios that include wind, botched landings, and go-arounds. Now, Andy, I heard you talk about that already. Does anybody else want to chime in? Any ideas on techniques to teach stable under varying conditions? Do we give them short approaches and have them expect a certain performance on speed and the rest, or what?
For VFR, yes.
Okay.
I mean, well, for example, using a VFR landing, we have a normal landing, which is generally done at 1.3 times VSO or stall
Yeah.
speed.
Yeah.
And if we're doing a short field landing, we teach using 1.2 times VSO. And also we teach doing it steeper with less power, because another alternative technique that a lot of primary students learn how to do short field landings, which I feel is totally wrong, is to drag it in with lots of power and chop it when you get over the numbers. But when you land on the runway that way, with all that power, your rollout is actually not going to be shorter.
Right.
In order to have the shorter rollout, you have to come in at the same slow airspeed, but without power, preferably at idle, and do a faster flare, because you're coming in slower, but in that flare, you absorb all that excess energy and your rollout is very short.
Okay.
So that's just two examples between normal and short field landings.
John,
go ahead, Andy. I didn't know if you were chiming in or not. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I think a key here is the varying conditions, and I love that because I think it's, we have to fly within our personal minimums always, right? And
Right.
However, when there's a CFI on board, that's the time to go gain some experience and fly in a heavy crosswind or some rain,
Oh, yes.
if it's within their personal minimums. And I think that's super important in terms of learning a stabilized approach, because if you haven't been in those conditions, it's not one of my rules is I don't like being the first person to do something, going into an airport, out of an airport if it's just opening, and it shouldn't be your first time in bad weather. Go experience it. We love finding bad weather to go fly in. So I would encourage people, as long as it's safe and within their personal minimums, take a CFI, go get that experience. It's huge.
No, absolutely. Most people will be thrilled to learn they can uh, do a much stronger crosswind with some coaching with the CFI with them. Absolutely.
And that, because some of these incidents occurred with CFIs in them, and that
Oh,
is
yeah.
something, and I'm going to tell everybody that it's being a flight instructor, it's a gift, it's a burden, and it goes all the way to the airlines. Because when we train someone in the airline, they get a fancy sim and we give them their type and all that. We're just knocking out the basics. Got to go get in an airplane with them. And as an instructor, you become an instructor. You're a primary. While they're typed, they're still brand new, and you've got to sign them off. And it is tough to decide how far do you let them go. I mean, when you coming in those crosswinds, like, when your first release, the first flight, I'm not going to let this pilot, whoever it is, fly this 7.5 and land in cross. I'm not going to do it. I'm going to give them a beautiful day with nothing going on. And because if you want to create distraction, and I have seen 7.6s get stuck. I have seen a stick shaker in a 7.6 on a guy distracted who was making a really going to LAX, and it's busy and there's a lot of chit chat in the radio. And the next thing you know, he gets a turn in and he's not ready. He gets a short turn, he's not ready. And all of a sudden we get a little stick shaker going. Now, thank goodness the 7.6 is a smart airplane and it wants to live. And so it actually extended a little flap and to automatically, which was kind of nice. But it's the only time I've seen that, but it happens with distraction. And then from a standpoint of as an instructor, how far do you let them get into something on crossings before you step in? And if you're good, they learn and everybody's happy. And if you let it go too far, you get possibly a LOC, well, not necessarily, but ground for sure, on the airlines. By the way, LOCI does occur in the airlines. It it doesn't it hasn't really resulted in fatalities, but it has occurred where it's not so much a fatality, but it's an incident. It's usually part of a botched go around, which happened once at my former carrier with a young captain, totally distracted, going into Cologne. And when you go to Europe and Asia, which I was an Asia instructor. I wasn't in Europe, but an Asia instructor, one of the big things is there's no 250 limit below 10. You're expected to keep your speed up. If you don't keep your speed up, they're going to punish you. And so you got to keep your speed up. And now everything changes. Approaches, your flap extension speeds, getting stabilized for the approach. And we had a guy over in Europe he got way too fast, didn't get slowed up, lost track of where everything was, went and cobbed the power for the go around, but he was already at the limit and cobbed the power, and he had a real issue. It turned into I don't even want to turn the Cologne Tower people were running for the stairway. I'll leave it at that. Nothing bad happened out of it outside of this guy. We got him back and put him in training, made him a co-pilot for the next 2 years. But the co-pilot, by the way, jumped in and took the airplane. How do you like that? So it does happen. It's just you don't really hear about it. And so it's a problem on every level, folks. That's why I'm going into this. Okay, it doesn't go away. They recommend incorporating a special emphasis area into flight reviews to address regional national safety concerns. What are some of the considerations that should go into the formulation of a flight review syllabus? Any thoughts on that?
Trying to think of an example besides noise.
I mean, I think this is interesting because when I do a flight review, sometimes I'm just trying to keep it normal because they're so rusty.
Yeah.
Some of the last things I want to do is introduce a problem, which so this is a dicey one. You got to be careful. I think this is this is stuff for the simulators Andy talked about in my mind. But any thoughts, Andy, before I go on to the next?
Yeah, I think kind of a pitfall, if someone's flying a twin or they're multi-rated, they might do their flight review in a single and they miss out on some multi-engine training that I think is very important. And the single's the cheaper route to get your flight review done, but might not be the safe route. And I think that recurrent training on multi-engine procedures, if you're going to be flying them, is important to be considerate of.
You know what, Andy? That's a great point. You're right. And I know, because I know a lot of folks who go jump in their single and then go get their review. And then meanwhile, they're flying something bigger and faster, so a twin. So, all right, let's go on here. Oh, they say, well, what safety issues we're going to skip that one, kind of covered under that. They recommended increasing the general aviation community's awareness of best practice regarding single pilot CRM operational techniques. Andy, I'm going to ask you, how do you see CRM concepts improving safety during single pilot? This is LOC. Is it, in my mind, it's about being really prepared before you leave, so you're not surprised by anything. But
Yeah, I would agree. I think prevention and preparation is everything. And it's, even myself, if I haven't been in the single for a while and we start flying into IMC, I realize, I say, man, this is stinking hard. No autopilot, single pilot. It's difficult, but I think, preparing ahead of time as much as able to reduce your workload when you're actually in the aircraft is huge.
yeah,
And I think it's, you know, on the single pilot side, I always say if you need help, ask for it, right? ATC is there to help you. And I think that's huge. And that's something that we emphasize pretty heavily at the school is, if you're a little disoriented, probably not a good time to be working on programming your GPS, right? Ask for a vector,
right.
ask for some
Mhm.
help. They're there to help you. So.
Yeah. Anybody else?
I think those are excellent points. I was going to stress using the autopilot uh, to the extent that you can. Um, you might be working on doing practice approaches, and you want to do some manually, which you should be practicing as well. But by all means, use the autopilot in between approaches while you're programming the GPS to set up the next approach. And I like Andy's point about, I always tell my students to ask for a, you don't want to say the word helping vector, but like a helping vector to get you going when the controller tells you direct to some waypoint and you don't have it in your GPS yet. Don't hesitate to ask for help for things like that.
I agree. I've done that many times. Done that in the airliners too, when you really get loaded up and they're going in and they give you 2, 3 different fixes to do, and you're in the middle of everything and there's turbulence and there's traffic everywhere in the LA basin. And sometimes you
Mhm.
just got to say, can you give us a heading first?
Yeah.
Boom, yes, sir, you got it. Now let's see. Um, I think we talked that. Focus on aeronautic decision making and pre-flight planning and the use of flight risk assessment tools. I I've seen them. Is anybody using them besides the Civil Air Patrol?
Frats?
Not a whole lot. Yeah. Go ahead, Andy. Sorry.
A frat, John? That's what you're asking? Anyone using
Yeah,
those?
yeah.
Oh
I
yeah.
think there might be one here. No, they don't have it. But yeah,
Every solo, I mean, every flight, our students are supposed to be using a frat.
Okay,
And before every solo, we'll tuck it away. We'll file it
okay.
away and make sure it was completed. I have
So
to
it's
do
a
a frat.
phase thing for you. Solo pilots do it.
Oh yeah, always. And
Right.
they're supposed to be for every dual flight as well,
Oh,
because most of them are in the PAVE checklist, right? And it's great because it
Mhm.
makes sure they're getting all aspects of PAVE in before they go and fly. But risk management, it should be introduced day one, right? And embedded
Mhm.
into every single lesson. I constantly tell all of our pilots, flying an airplane's easy. Your job is to manage risk. That's what you're there for. So.
well
But yeah,
stated.
frats are huge. I'm a big proponent of those. Everybody ought to be
Okay.
doing them.
Well, I suspect I'm going to get to see yours real soon.
You will.
They did put a couple things in here. I don't want to spend time on this as we move along here. But I like your thoughts that it's really important in primacy early on, you know. This is interesting. Incorporate AOA education and training at all levels. Encourage installation and use of AOA systems for improved awareness for stall margin. How do you translate classroom discussions about AOA into the real world? I don't personally have access to an aircraft with AOA. I think you do, Andy, with Danny Breslin's. Yeah.
We do. Yeah, one of the
You
aircraft
use it
has
in
it.
training?
Yeah, we do. I mean, it's more for informational purposes in the aircraft. That's
Uh-huh.
what it's there for. We're not flying strictly off of that, but I'm surprised we don't see more AOA indicators in the GA training environment because I do think they're quite useful.
When
Obviously,
does it become a distraction?
well, yeah, when they're staring at it, that becomes their pitch instrument as opposed to looking outside and managing their
Right.
airspeed. So it can become a distraction. But I think the basic concepts are helpful, at an early stage, and then you get guys in a jet, during a circling approach, and hopefully they start watching their AOA, even if they're new, because they've
Yep.
had some exposure to it. But we don't have a lot of them, unfortunately.
Okay. I'll move on here.
They're important, yeah.
I have it in my aircraft. They're great.
They have this, they threw this in here, folks. This is kind of we're going to just kind of move through it, but we kind of know that's maneuvering phase while performing some kind of turn. And so there is a question in here. I go ahead and I think this is the last of the questions.
Okay,
The
we'll launch that
874
one.
pilots were asked, what's the primary control surface you use to turning an airplane? I consider this a little bit of a trick question
It is, yeah, but it
because we
is a
really
good one though.
use everything,
Mhm.
in a way. But what does everybody say here? What say ye?
Well,
That's as much
yeah.
pirate as you're going to get out of me today.
So we are 42% into it. And right now the rudder is winning out. We're at 60%, but 64%, 18 out of 28 we got left.
Okay, let's
Give
go
it
to
a,
it.
okay, I'm going
And
to end the
874
poll.
pilots were asked what's primary control surface. That was across the board. I think we have a 63% responded aileron, 23 responded rudder, 14 responded elevator. Again, I consider this a trick question, but the airplane flying handbook states the elevator moves the nose of the airplane up or down in relation to the pilot, perpendicular to the wings. Doing that pulls, both sets the pitch attitude and in the turn pulls the nose of the airplane around the turn. So it's obviously they're stating it's elevator here, but I would tell you we initiate the bank with aileron and we pull through the elevator, we coordinate with rudder. So
Yeah,
I think this is more of a word thing where we think about how we train people and that's all. So it's clear. Okay. I don't,
yeah.
and that's our little picture.
Hmm.
I threw this up here. I got to be honest. I left it in this. I didn't put this in. This was here. This is a velocity versus load. Does anybody, I mean, I don't want to explain that. Does anybody use this? I'm asking. I don't see anybody. I see
Comes
it.
up on check rides a lot.
No
CFI
way.
check
Does it?
rides. Oh yeah. And commercial check rides, we get asked some questions on it. The VG diagram, yeah.
Oh, you do.
Hmm.
Okay. Thank you. I needed to know that. I have never seen it. I've seen them, but I haven't seen them used in any particular phase of training I've been exposed to.
Hmm.
Okay. All right, we're getting there, folks. So look, we talked about angle of attack. I didn't rearrange it. It's a little disjointed here. And we've seen these various angle of attack indicators. I'm going to add something in here. So Andy, you guys have one of those in what, 9-1 X-ray or something? And
Yep.
you train its use or you just kind of let people figure it out?
Oh no, we train to use it. I mean, any equipment in the aircraft, people ought to know how to use it. So, we'll get them into the manual and, show them. We'll do a demo right at altitude, what it looks like, if we're, high AOA, low AOA,
Okay.
or on the meatball, and then coming into land, they can reference that. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So look, I threw this in here. Does anybody integrate the use of a flight director at this point? I mean, at what point, obviously in primary training, maybe not, but in instrument training, I've seen more and more airplanes with flight directors. I fly with people that have them that never turn them on. Uh, the reason I brought up flight director is this is an excellent pitch limit indicator
Mm-hmm.
for multi-engine airplanes. In fact, and that's so I integrate a flight director into my training because all of these King Air accidents, these VMC rollovers, everyone ends the same. The gear is down, the speed is between 85 and 88, and they're at 14 to 15 degrees nose up. Every one of them. Every
Mm-hmm.
one of them. It all ends
Yeah.
the same. And why are we at 14 degrees, with an
Mm-hmm.
engine pulled back? We're not an F-15. We need to be a max of 8 to 10. So I train the use of a flight director as a pitch limit. Typically, I have the guy go around on their flight
Mm-hmm.
director, pops in about 7, 8 degrees, works really good. If you're flying, a big bad King Air, you could probably go to 10. But if you don't exceed that and you lose an engine, you're probably not going to VMC the airplane. So I'm not the only one doing that. I kind of started that on my own. But guess who's doing that now? In order to mitigate, because I'm sitting here picking on poor old Beechcraft, well, on the left here, I want everybody to look at this checklist. This is engine failure during takeoff checklist for a King Air. And understand that this is a Part 23 airplane. This is not a King Air course. This is a multi-engine course because they're all the same. I don't
Mm-hmm.
care if it's a Seminole, but typically it's power max allowable, airspeed maintain takeoff or above, gear up, prop lever, in this case, feather. Airspeed after obstacle clearance, best blue line. Okay, flaps up. Pretty boilerplate across any multi-engine airplane, could be
Mm-hmm.
an Apache. This is the checklist that's in all the King Air, well, the trainers and the Barons. It's in the 90s. It's in all the 200s, which are 12,500 pound airplanes that are going 300 knots. It's the same checklist. Well, guess what? Beechcraft has realized that their airplanes are involved in not a lot, but in too many VMC loss of control. So what did they quietly start doing with the King Air 350? Look at the right. This is checklist on the right is the newer, as I call it, King Air 350. If you go buy a new King Air, your engine failure after takeoff checklist has got a subtle change. It says rotate to 10 degrees.
Mm-hmm.
They took out. Now, some people would argue you got to say max power, and I agree. So when I teach the airplane, I obviously teach 10 degrees max power, so on and so forth. But Beechcraft has now, and it's not just on the 350, on some of their last production 90s, their high performance GTs, they threw in a pitch limit of 10. So basically, Beechcraft has found that if you direct a pilot to a pitch on takeoff, that the airspeed will fall in line. Because if you're rotating to an airspeed, we all know we're trying to bracket that. If you pitch too much, it gets slow. You push down, so suddenly seconds are wasted as you're trying to bracket a target airspeed. Well, they know from all of their tests, and I can tell you, as flying these airplanes for the past 10 years, if I don't care if you go to flight safety, CAE, fly right any of them for a type rating, when they give you the engine failure, if you pitch to 10, positive rate gear up, you're going to slay that. You're just going to nail it, and you'll never VMC it. You'll never exceed 10. So Beechcraft is quietly, without any fanfare, changing and directing people to immediately use a pitch as a reference for speed. So pitch, then gear up. Now we come down and we start looking at speed. That's how they're fighting LOCI. So I wanted to share that with you. The industry is concerned, and that's how they're doing it. And somewhere in this, there's probably some wiggle room for use of that in some of the primary training with some of the newer airplanes that are coming out when they're coming out with G1000s and a flight director. At some point, that could be a real aid for pilots on the new stuff. Okay. Any questions? Andy, you're a jet varmint. Don't you guys on your big, I can tell you on the old transports, we didn't pitch to a speed. We pitched to we rotated to a pitch, then check the speed.
No, that's exactly it. I mean, you just nestle right into the flight director. I mean, they're smart, and it actually recognizes right in the Gulfstream that I fly, it recognizes an engine loss, and it
Oh,
will set your airspeed for you at V2 to V2 plus 10 with maximum power. So it'll
yeah.
control your airspeed by way of your pitch. So you just nestle right in there. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's great. But
So this is something that I think in the industry, we're going to start seeing more of with the newer airplanes, with the newer avionics that are getting more sophisticated and cheaper. The G1000s and the rest. I know some of these schools are running around with G1000 with flight directors. I would encourage a reference for that. I really, anyway, I don't want to belabor that. That's just one of the ways. When you come into my classroom, I write up on the board when I come in and I say what we're going to talk about today in your training, and I write on the board, the whiteboard, I write Wang Chung, which is Chinese for perfect pitch. And I said, we're going to seek perfect pitch as we do this. And then we go through the whole performance chart. We show, I'll show some of these accidents and where they occurred and what speed, and then people realize they all end the same way. So that's how I incorporate it in. I make people think pitch, 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 pitch. It doesn't always help and anyway, let's just run through this in review. Loss of control in flight results in situations which the pilot should have either maintained or regained control of the aircraft, did not. LOCI remains by far the top occurrence category for fatal accidents. Special emphasis area, which is why we're here. The magnitude, obviously, maneuvering is a critical phase. Placing special emphasis on LOCI awareness and prevention. These are some of the solutions. Areas where instructors have a direct and immediate impact is obviously in transition, approaches and landing, risk-based flight reviews, CRM, angle of attack awareness especially. And that's, again, for me, I'm big on that last one, AOA awareness. That's me with a 350. Any questions? Wow, you guys are easy.
Okay, not everybody at once now.
They're all stunned or asleep.
Well, while we're waiting for that first question, I'll tell you, I totally agree with you. I teach using the flight director for every takeoff with a go around button. I think that's really awesome. I found it also really helps to combat so much graphic illusion. At pilots, they recognize that they got to have their eyes on the attitude indicator, but without something on the attitude indicator to focus on, they tend to not really use it with precision. But I've had people when we take off like nighttime or into low IMC conditions, they're no longer climbing the aircraft as soon as we get IMC. But you turn on that flight director pitch for the go around, which is usually right, as you said, right around 7.5 degrees. That gives them exactly what they need to focus on to keep the aircraft climbing. So I think it's a huge improvement.
And I would ask if there's something that all of you instructors can do for me is get your people flying flight directors as soon as you can. It makes all the difference in the world. If you can't fly a flight director, there's probably no way you could pass a type ride on a King Air. Probably no way. It's got to be done. And remember that when we take off, it's a visual maneuver only for the first 100, 200 feet. Because you're going into a 200 overcast ceiling potentially or less. And so you need to be able to go transition from that initial yaw of an engine failure. You got to use your full rudder center, but after you start rotating, it's an instrument maneuver, period. And you got to be able to fly it. I had a young man just a month or two ago from USU, University State, Utah, who is in their flying program up there. He's an instructor. He came down here and he came down with another guy that was getting recurrent training. And I gave him initial training on the King Air. It was interesting when we got to the engine failures, we were having a hard time. I mean, we were seeing blue, red screens. And I'm just scratching my head because he flew such a nice airplane until we did the engine failures on this simulator. And I realized that he's looking outside. You can't fly this airplane looking outside or you're going to over rotate and you're going to VMC it, which is what was happening. So on the after two of those, I looked at it and I went, I think he's trying to fly this visually. and he's not looking at his instruments. You can look outside visually for the first time, but you got to come right back in. So I gave him 100 overcast ceiling, and he couldn't look outside, and he nailed it. Perfect. Beautifully done. So,
hey, we got a question.
oh,
So in the chat, so VJ asks or says, my instructor, second, I lost it here. My instructor always makes me to verbally review takeoff brief. Are there any recommendations for a good takeoff brief?
Andy?
Yeah, I would obviously always defer to, if the FAA has anything in the P-Hacker Airplane Flying Handbook, is kind of the starting source. However, that being said, I think the performance is important to review on takeoff. When are we expected to rotate? What airspeed are we going to rotate? When are we expected to rotate? That way, if we're way past our abort point, we actually abort the takeoff and not continue. And then quite often what we see is students start to go through all their memory items of what they're going to do if they have an engine failure. But in reality, if those are memory items, you should know them, or use your checklist. And so the emphasis really ought to be more on what are we going to do? And quite often that is airport specific. Is there terrain out there at Gillespie Field where we're at? We probably got to make a turn versus, hey, we're actually okay to proceed straight out on one engine and deal with the situation and advise ATC. So I would say reviewing performance and then airport specific, what we're going to do. And I think obviously we ought to have in a single engine, when we're going to make that turn back. And if we are under that altitude of making the turn back, where the heck are we going to go? That way, John mentioned earlier, planning and prevention. That way, if something happens, we've at least briefed it, and hopefully we just act on what we briefed.
That's a good point, Andy. When you look at runway like 27 right at Gillespie, that does have restrictions. You need to be able to maintain a climb gradient of around 800 foot a minute to clear that mountain ahead of you. So you come off in a twin, you bust one out coming out of there, and you're IMC, you better have a plan. You're probably not going to be able to maintain 800 foot a minute. So in some regards, that may be part of the go or no go decision if the weather's bad enough. What do we got here? Let's see.
Okay, we got another one. The flight director was the most important thing tonight regarding the King Air. That was fascinating. Let's see. Another one. Great discussion. Student pilot, thanks so much for the session. That looks like caught up there on the chat. I'll just add on my safety brief before every takeoff. I insist on, in other words, well, there's two main things I'm focused on in addition to the memory items, as was being mentioned. The first thing is I want to make sure that I don't run off the end of the runway trying to take off, like on a shorter field or high density altitude. So I want to make sure I have 3/4 my rotate speed by the halfway point, and I'll identify something on the runway that I'm going to use to indicate that I'm at the halfway point. And if I'm not at 3/4 rotate speed, I'm going to be pulling the power back and stopping before I pass that point. The second item is, in addition to having a minimum altitude to return, I think it's important to actually call out what that altitude is, MSL. In other words, if I'm taking off from Gillespie at 400 feet and the minimum altitude to return is 1,000 feet, I'm going to call out I need 1,400 feet before I turn back. And I'm also going to take into account whether that's going to be a right turn or a left turn and what my emergency runway is going to be for that particular airport. I think all those things have to be decided before you're rolling down the runway. So that's just my 2 cents.
I agree with that. Now, do you have the markers? You should know what to expect. Sometimes you have engine issues, especially I think I'm more on recips for me, where we're like something isn't right here. You've got to know when to pull it back. So
yeah, absolutely. Well, anybody else have any questions? You're welcome to unmute and just ask them. Otherwise, we're about to wrap it up here tonight. Okay, well, with that, I'm going to say thank you very much, John, for our presentation tonight, and appreciate Andy helping out as well. Great presentation. And if anyone wants a link to the recording for this presentation after the fact, you're welcome to email me, and I'll share you a link to the recording that we have. But otherwise, let's see. I think otherwise, yeah. Thanks everybody very much for joining us. Of course, everybody will get wings credit for attending tonight. And thank you all. Any final comments?
Not for me.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Well, good night, all, and see you next month.
All right. See you later.
Okay. Bye-bye.